The Munificent-class Star Frigate was perhaps the most recognizable of the CIS Navy's many warship classes, a common sight all over the galaxy during the Clone Wars. These versatile heavy cruisers were the backbone of the Separatist fleet, able to hold their own against Republic warships well above their weight class, and though they were skeletal in design and often cheaply made, they were reliable and effective capital ships. But what isn't as well known about these vessels is that they actually served a dual purpose. Apart from being the frontline ships of the Confederate Navy, they actually played a crucial role in Separatist infrastructure, acting as mobile communications transceivers for the CIS. In this video, we'll be taking a close look at these iconic ships and their unconventional second purpose.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
The Munificent-class Star Frigate was commissioned by the Intergalactic Banking Clan and produced by Hoersch-Kessel Drive Incorporated and Gory Revolutionary Industries. In the years before the Separatist crisis, the IGBC quietly amassed a large fleet of these warships, which they used both to defend their assets and to harass indebted worlds. When the IGBC threw its weight behind the Confederacy of Independent Systems, it donated these ships to the Confederate Navy, which began producing more by the tens of thousands. They rapidly became the most common ship in the Navy, and they served at the forefront of Separatist fleets until the end of the Clone Wars. But before we get any further into talking about this warship's role, let's take a closer look at its specs. The Munificent featured a skeletal design, as these ships were designed to be mostly automated and mass-produced, with many parts of the warship lightly armored or protected only by the warship's deflector shields. The vessel was 825 meters long, and its profile was dominated by a pair of long, wing-like structures located midships, which served as platforms for sensors and communications equipment. These wings formed a sort of cross shape with two shorter protrusions from the aft section, which housed more sensors and the warship's hyperdrive units. The rest of the aft section was dominated by the vessel's ion engines and shield generators, which were linked to two main reactors located on either side of the forward section, just before the wings. Below the wings were a set of docking rings and massive storage bays, and beneath those were the warship's super dense fuel tanks. The rest of the forward section contained power cells, tensor fields, and most of the warship's crew quarters and weapons emplacements. The cruiser's bridge was located at the fore of the ship, built into a precarious looking command tower. The Munificent was extremely fast and maneuverable for a heavy cruiser of its size, and it was also easy to maintain and had low crew requirements, all of which owed to the vessel's skeletal design. These warships were designed to operate with a crew of 1,100 organic beings, but the vast majority were heavily automated, equipped with ship-wide droid brains that allowed a skeleton crew of just 200 droids to run the ship with no problems. This extreme automation and crew reduction not only meant that vast numbers of these ships could be fielded at a low cost to personnel, but also that much of the interior could be given over to cargo storage. Munificent-class Star Frigates featured roughly a dozen large docking rings and vast storage bays, with a carrying capacity of 40,000 tons plus 2 years of consumables. This was because the ships were originally partially intended to transport massive amounts of valuables between IGBC vault worlds. During the Clone Wars, these vaults were instead used to transport huge amounts of war material, and a single Munificent was capable of carrying 150,000 deactivated battle droids plus a few hundred passengers. Of course, due to its cheap design, the Munificent was very lightly armored. Its heaviest armoring was on the upper sides of the fore and aft sections, which were shielded by two massive armored sheaths that protected the engines in the aft and the reactors and crew sections in the fore. This armor wouldn't last long in a firefight, however, so these ships primarily relied on their deflector shields for protection. Additionally, while the stock model Munificent completely lacked starfighter hangars, up to 4 squadrons of Vulture droids could magnetically latch onto the rafters holding up the fore-section armor sheaths, hanging on the ship's superstructure like bats. The vessel's armor sheaths allowed the Munificent to carry Vulture droids through hyperspace in this manner, meaning that these ships were rarely without starfighter escort despite their lack of hangars. Of course, being a warship, One of the main features of the Munificent was its weapons. Its biggest weapons were a pair of long-range prow ion cannons and a massive chin-mounted dual turbo laser. The latter could only be used against large targets but could cripple a battle station in one shot, while the former could disable capital ships from extraordinarily long distances. Its other weapons included 20 dual turbo laser turrets, 26 fixed light dual turbo lasers, and 38 point defense laser cannons. The turbo lasers were mostly mounted on the fore section where they covered a variety of firing arcs, while the point defense cannons were distributed all over the ship. All told, the Munificent was very well armed, even more so than many larger Republic warships. Its many turbo lasers allowed lines of these cruisers to shred through all but the toughest Republic blockades, while its comprehensive point defense arrays insulated it against starfighter assaults. But the Munificent had another major asset, which we briefly mentioned before: its wide array of sensor equipment and communication devices. A large portion of this ship was dominated by this sort of equipment, which was all over the Munificent's wings, aft towers, and main lateral line. Each of these ships featured a pair of long-range hyperwave transceivers, a hyperwave jammer, long-range sensors that could even detect most cloaked ships via mass scanning systems, signal relays, and secure communications receptors. All of this equipment was top of the line, in stark contrast to the otherwise cheap design of these ships. In combat, it was used to provide area scans and secure communications for Separatist fleets and to inhibit the communications of enemy fleets, but it was designed for another purpose. Each Munificent-class star frigate was designed to function as a fully operational, completely secure HoloNet relay. The intergalactic banking clan, you see, didn't trust the public HoloNet, and when they built their fleet in the years before the Clone Wars, they intended for it to double as their own private HoloNet. Once these ships were deployed all over the galaxy, the IGBC could stop using vulnerable public HoloNet transceivers for remote financial transactions, instead switching to a much more secure mobile network that they had full control over. This had the added benefit of greatly extending the range at which the IGBC could conduct secure communications. Anywhere their ships went, their communications network went as well. It cannot be overstated how important this was for the CIS. During the Clone Wars, the Republic nationalized the HoloNet, limiting or outright denying access to public transceivers for Separatist worlds. To combat this, the Separatist Council created the Hypercommunications Cartel, a joint venture between the IGBC and Techno Union headed by Senator Ponudo of Ando. The HCC provided Separatist worlds with an alternative to the Republic HoloNet, which was used to broadcast Separatist propaganda and provide communications for the CIS. To do this, however, it needed an entirely new network of HoloNet transceivers, as reclaiming and converting the old Republic ones took time and labor. Fortunately for the Confederacy, it already had a new network in the form of its fleets of Munificent-class star frigates. Thus, the Confederacy's patchwork of pirate HoloNets simply piggybacked off the Navy, providing secure communications for Separatist space. Since the Munificent was ubiquitous across the Confederacy, the fleet served well enough as alternative communications infrastructure all the way until the very end of the Clone Wars. Even after the Clone Wars, rogue organic commanded Munificent-class star frigates sometimes played a role in communications for Separatist holdouts. On top of that, the Confederacy also regularly used the Munificent to disrupt or hijack Republic communications infrastructure as well. In a way, the Republic shot itself in the foot by cutting the Confederacy off from the HoloNet, as this meant that the Separatists no longer had to worry about damaging public HoloNet infrastructure. Thus, small squadrons of Munificent-class star frigates were often deployed in attacks on Republic HoloNet relays, jamming or destroying them while hijacking Republic networks to broadcast Separatist propaganda. These attacks were often used to isolate and demoralize Republic forces, as well as sow terror in Loyalist space. All this means that the Munificent-class star frigate had the unique distinction of being essential to both the military and domestic sides of the Confederacy. Usually, there was an unusually large divide between the ordinary Separatists and the operations of CIS forces, which often pursued the so-called stateless strategy and fought as if they had no territory to defend, leaving Separatist planetary security forces to defend their own. But the Munificent was important to both sides of the equation. For ordinary Separatists, these heavy cruisers were vital to communications, assisting in defense and day-to-day operations, while to the military they were essential in allowing the CIS Navy to operate independently deep in unknown or loyalist space. So that's our look at one of the most iconic ships of the Clone Wars. But what do you think? Are there other Separatist ships you'd like us to discuss next? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.